Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. And this is our 9th video in our Asian Horror Year in Review playlist. Almost unbelievably, we have already covered over 100 Asian horror films, and we have more than 500 to go. So let's keep moving. Now our coverage of Asian horror during the 1990s will touch on 87 movies, far too many to cover in 2 or 3 videos. See, in the previous time periods we've covered, I've tried to tackle each decade in 2 or 3 videos. But we are now confronted with so many movies that I simply have to change up my game plan. So from now on, we are going to explore Asian horror by multi-year or single-year periods, not decades. Also, the number of films that we will cover in each episode is going to decrease, meaning that these videos will be shorter in length, with some exceptions, of course. So in this video, we are going to cover 1990 and 1991, which are 2 fairly weak years in Asian horror. Of the 11 films that we will discuss, I disliked 6 of them. Of the 5 films that I did like, it is still debatable as to whether any of them should be considered high priorities. However, there are some interesting films here, and it's always interesting to explore and become informed on industry trends. So, as always, titles for the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. So the first film we are going to cover tonight is a film called Lucky Sky Diamond, a Japanese exploitation horror film from 1990. Now, some people seem to think that this is part of the Guinea Pig film series, but it is, in fact, an unrelated film. So just an FYI there. Now, in this film, a demented doctor and his female assistant kidnap and torture a lady in this fairly short film that is only 60 minutes long. Now, first and foremost, there's way too much incessant, loud, irritating screaming from the lead actress, who simply just won't shut up. This gets really infuriating as the film progresses. I mean, it's just way too repetitive in terms of its screaming. There is adequate stomach-churning gore present, but there's not an ounce, not even an ounce of well-crafted suspense or interesting visuals. The character interaction is either boring or obnoxious. For example, one scene shows the doctor receiving oral sex while eating a cockroach. I like my weird movies, but that's just stupid. I'm sorry. Also, every scene seems to drag on for far longer than it has to. There's also some fight scenes near the end of this movie that are really some of the dumbest moments I've seen in a Japanese horror film. They're just really badly filmed. An entertaining movie requires more than simply chucking in mass quantities of hysterical behavior. In my opinion, Lucky Sky Diamond it's borderline garbage. Like, that's how worthless this film is, in my opinion. I did not enjoy this much at all. I actually rewatched it lately on YouTube, and my second viewing only reinforced my hatred for this. I will never watch this one again. It's not one I'm a fan of, obviously. So next is a film called Hiruko the Goblin, 1990 Japanese horror film. This is directed by our good friend, Shinya Tsukamoto, who previously directed The Great Analog World and Tetsuo the Iron Man. Now, unfortunately, Hiruko the Goblin is one of his least impressive films. There's a rather unsatisfactory story of goblins introduced, and they basically terrorize a school. Nothing too complicated here. There are only a handful of deaths to enjoy, and almost all of which involve decapitation, which is alright, I guess, but still a bit repetitive. The monster design of the goblins is actually a blend of humorous and cool. I really like the goblin designs in this. It's not something you see quite often. They're basically human heads with spider legs, and they run really fast, and they stick their tongues out and fly. So I did like the monster designs in this movie. Those were pretty cool. The first half is fairly briskly paced and watchable. It's pretty good, but the second half, it just kind of falls apart because it gets very boring and slows down, and I would say it almost takes itself too seriously. It tries to go a serious route, and it doesn't have the script writing or the I guess the interest behind it to drive it through a serious patch during the second half. So, kind of a shame I did not like this one, because the premise is rather interesting, and the film has a few good actors in it too. For example, Naoto Takanaka, who also played the school teacher from Swing Girls, a Japanese comedy from 2004. Well, he's in this, and even he can't save it. So, unfortunately, this is one of Tsukamoto's duds, in my opinion. I would not recommend it. So next on our list here is a sequel. It is Shake, Rattle, and Roll 2 from 1990. This is, of course, a Filipino horror anthology film. So this anthology consists of 3 short films, 35 to 45 minutes each, approximately. The first film here, or first short film, is called Multo, and it's about a honeymoon gone bad when 2 lovebirds have strange dreams in the former house of a dead murderer. All right, not a bad premise. It's actually a bit creepy. It's more creepy than I was expecting. It has the score is actually quite good in this. It's kind of an eerie score that I enjoyed. It uses ominous sounds and dripping water noises, which kind of supplements things. A pretty good segment with some bloody violence tossed in for those who enjoy that type of thing. So already, the second installment gets off to a better start than its predecessor, because the first segment in that anthology was not particularly good. But Shake, Rattle, and Roll 2, let's see if it can maintain this momentum here. It has a pretty good first segment, but let's see here. The second film, Kulam, is about a man and his young friend who are chased by a witch inside a hospital. Unfortunately, this one just drops the ball right at the start. It starts off very poorly with some really lame humor. But it does get a little better once the monsters start showing up. In the end, however, it's the weakest segment in this particular anthology. I did not enjoy this one. Now, the third short story, Aswang, concerns a young girl who must escape a town full of vampires. Now, this one starts off a bit slow, but the second half is actually quite good. These are the Filipino version of vampires, which are very different from the more popular mythos in the West. There's quite an emphasis on tribal ritual in this too, which is interesting. This was a pretty solid segment. So overall, I would have to say the first and the third segments in Shake, Rattle, and Roll 2 are probably some of the better segments of all of the Shake, Rattle, and Roll films, at least the ones that I've seen. And because of that, I can actually recommend this second installment over all of the other installments. And, there's nothing here that's really that great, which kind of says something regarding my opinion on the rest of the series. But it's a pretty good anthology to check out. Now, the DVD availability of this is that it's not really available on DVD, but, and I remember this now, some of these Filipino horror films I kind of watched in the same month or two, because there's a website called the Filipino Channel that's online. It's called tfc.tv, and they have a bunch of Filipino horror films without subtitles. But I think what I did was I signed up for a membership for them. They have like a monthly fee, and I signed up for 1 or 2 months, and I watched a bunch of Filipino horror films on that website. So that's how I kind of knocked off some of these more obscure titles, at least in terms of the Philippines. So if you're interested in it, you could check out that website. You can knock some of those off. I would recommend Shake, Rattle, and Roll 2. It's pretty good. Now, unfortunately, we need to slug through another piece of rat-infested dog crap before we get to another good movie. And this one is it's bad. This film is called 964 Pinocchio, a Japanese cyberpunk horror film from 1991. Alright, let's do it. So in this film, a woman meets a sex slave who is accidentally released into the outside world. Now, the huge problem I have right off the bat with this movie, in a nutshell, is that there's too much time wasted on drawn out, uninteresting, stupid, disgusting events. Like, for example, teaching the slave how to speak, walking around aimlessly while vomiting profusely, running in the streets while screaming hysterically, etc. I mean, do we really need to see someone vomit a few dozen times in a row? And, I could be wrong in this, but I think the actress and actor in this, whoever was vomiting, I think it was the actress, I think they actually vomited on camera. Like, this is true method acting, people. They actually vomited. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I'm sorry, but that's just nauseating. I have no interest in watching something like that. To be fair, there are a few interesting visuals here and there, but not nearly enough to compensate for all of the other like boring and uninteresting events that occupy at least 80% of this runtime. I mean, yeah, this is very weird stuff, but being weird in and of itself does not guarantee an entertaining film, and 964 Pinocchio serves to remind us of this fact. So, I understand and greatly appreciate the fact that Japanese cyberpunk films throw away conventional formulaic filmmaking standards and basically go for a shot to the heart in terms of like a no-holds-barred visual audio assault on the senses. And that's exactly what I love so much about Tetsuo the Iron Man, which we previously covered. I mean, it has boatloads of awesome, exceptionally cool visuals for the viewer to chew on. But, these aren't your typical crazy movies with characters acting stupid all the time. On the contrary, the good cyberpunk films, you get a wickedly stylish, kind of nightmarish experience that blends horrific technology with biological flesh. So, the good ones have a certain precision to them. And, they give an entertaining impression without provoking irritation and being obnoxious, in my opinion. The good ones do. So, something like Tetsuo is really the essence of what I'm looking for in this type of film. But 964 Pinocchio is like the exact opposite. It's, this one really irritated me. With that said, however, this same director would redeem himself in 1996 with a far more impressive film, which we will cover. So look out for that. The next film here, man, we're hitting, like I said, these 2 years were not the best for Asian horror, so we're hitting another kind of dud here. This film is called Mikadroid, also known as Robo Kill Beneath Disco Club Lila. Man, what a title. 1991 Japanese horror. Again, one of those situations where you have a fantastic title in a not-so-fantastic film. So in this one, a human-sized robot awakens after a 50-year slumber and goes on a murder spree beneath a disco club. So apparently the Japanese were working on this killer robot during the World War II area, but shut down the project due to, I think, budget constraints or something. Well, that didn't stop this metal murderer from reviving itself and wreaking havoc on innocent civilians. So the premise of this film is ace, man. It's good stuff, but the execution is surprisingly bland here. A few of the death scenes are hilarious, which is a good thing, as they completely abandon any sense of realism because the victims act in excessively artificial ways while meeting their demise. I guess that's the only way I could kind of put it. You'd kind of understand it if you watched it. But that doesn't change the fact that the horror sequences in general are ineptly constructed, with very poor camera work and very little gore, too. This also has some pacing problems, this film, with some significantly dull patches to sit through, and I guess the money shots, so to speak, aren't good enough to really warrant the wait. So, a few laughs aside, this is a miss. In fact, I would say that if you want a killer robot movie, you could go watch something like the American horror film Chopping Mall from 1986 instead. I enjoyed that movie more than this one. Alright, next here. We have one that, I don't know, gets a little bit of traction online in terms of how people see it. This is kind of one of the earlier Japanese, I guess, supernatural ghost films, I guess from the modern era. This is the film that some people say really kind of started a lot of the modern trends in Japanese horror. And that film is called Scary True Stories, Japanese horror film from 1991. So this is an anthology of 10 short films that are presumably reenactments of actual events. So let's do a quick summary of each story here. So the first one, The Lonely Girl. A girl roams an empty locker room in her school at night. The second story is called Spiritual Flight. After her grandmother passes away, a young girl has a weird dream and investigates. The third story is called Mystery of the Red Earring. Now, after finding a mysterious earring, a young girl discovers that it has a strange power. The fourth film is called Gymnasium in Summer. 3 junior high girls investigate their school's ghostly legend. The next short is called House of the Restless Spirits. A family moves into their new home, which may house some spirits. Wow, that's pretty generic, huh? The next one, The Hospital at Midnight. A new nurse is haunted by ghosts in the hospital. The next film is called Be Gone, Crone! Exclamation point. A young girl toys with an urban legend incantation. The next film is called My Friend at the Stairwell. A young girl attempts to help a mournful ghost. The next short film is Paralysis. A salary woman experiences strange phenomena. And then finally we have The Black Hair at the Abandoned Building. 3 thrill seekers investigate a haunted building. So those are your 10 short films within this anthology. Now on the whole, these shorts are mostly mediocre in terms of both scariness and storytelling. However, there are some positive attributes peppered throughout here. With the most memorable scene, in my opinion, occurring during the 4th chapter, Gymnasium in Summer, which has a creepy red woman slowly walking towards the camera in a dimly lit room. But in all honesty, I really feel like I need to watch this anthology again, because it's directed by Norio Surata. Not a particularly well-known director in the West, but he's given us some good stuff over the years, such as Talk to the Dead from 2013, Orochi from 2008, Premonition from 2004, and Ringu Zero from 2000. So I became a fan of his after I originally watched this Scary True Stories for the first time years ago. So there's a pretty good chance that I might appreciate this anthology more during a second viewing. That's actually the case for me a lot of times. If I rewatch a movie, I usually can appreciate a little bit more, even if it's not that good. But, for now, however, I have to trust my initial impression. And my initial impression was that this is just, it's not really that good of an anthology. I cannot emphatically recommend it. It is widely available, though, if you want to check it out. But this is one of those weird situations where, you know how sometimes you didn't really like a movie before, but when you read about it again, you're like, man, I really should have enjoyed this based on the whole premise and everything that's going on here, the director. So I actually look forward to rewatching this, even if it doesn't turn out to be that good again. Next film here, Shake, Rattle, and Roll 3. Another dud. But it's the last dud in this video, so stick with me. We're going to hit some good movies soon. Shake, Rattle, and Roll 3 is a 1991 Filipino horror anthology. Now, unfortunately, this is the installment which resulted in this particular series of films becoming irreparably harmed. Every film in this franchise that I've seen after the second installment has been underwhelming, in my opinion. So Shake, Rattle, and Roll 3 is an anthology of 3 short horror films. The first one is called Yaya. And in this one, a young mother tries to protect their baby, who is haunted by an ominous spirit. So this is set during Christmas time, which does add a little bit of atmosphere. They really should make more horror films set around Christmas, shouldn't they? But, that's one little positive here. It's a bit cheesy. There's an old hag as a ghost, and some unconvincing screaming by the lead actress. But overall, I found this one to be okay. It's kind of watchable. Mostly probably due to the Christmas atmosphere. I'm a big fan of Christmas-themed horror movies, the few that exist. So it's alright. And this slightly better than mediocre segment is the high point in this anthology, which isn't saying much. The second film is called 8. A young woman discovers that her dead sister has come alive and is acting strange. Well, I would hope so. If she was dead before, she becomes obsessed with bathing in dirt and eating it. Okay, not quite an intriguing premise. Not the most intriguing of premises, but so long story short, this is a slow-paced and forgettable film. It's one of those, kind of like the first segment of the first Shake, Rattle, and Roll series. I really remember nothing about it other than watching the woman eat dirt. Not a good thing. So let's just move on to the third segment, which is called Nane. A student visits a nearby beach, but unwittingly brings home a horrible alien monster. So there are a few good death scenes here involving acid. And the little monster guy is unintentionally cheesy when he vomits. But the acting in this really got on my nerves, man. Way too obnoxious. Especially when attempting humor. Bad stuff. So much so, in fact, that it makes the non-horror scenes very annoying. Hard to sit through this one. You know, the horror scenes themselves, when they pop up, little monster pops up and pukes acid or whatever, those are actually kind of entertaining, but man, just getting there is just tough. So, overall, Shake, Rattle, and Roll 3, it's not really an awful anthology per se, but it really is not worth seeking out. So come on, people, let's get to some interesting, good films here, and we're there. We got some interesting ones here. The next one is a film called My Soul is Slashed, 1991, Japanese horror drama hybrid. So after dying in a car accident, a businessman is transfused with the blood of Dracula and returned to life. A woman who is a vampire expert decides to study him. So this is actually a very dramatic horror film that uses low-key events between the characters in amusing ways. There's actually quite a touch of humor here present. So basically this vampire has difficulty transitioning toward his new life, and has some unfinished business with his former company as well. So this film basically takes the vampire theme, okay, and it infuses it with the everyday problems that a normal human being would have. So this character is probably more recognizable and understandable to a viewer than the typical vampire, which is a benefit to this film. Not a particularly scary film, but there are a few slightly creepy scenes peppered in. Now the director here is a man called Shuzuke Kaneko, who has given us some absolutely fantastic films in his career, especially outside of the horror genre. He directed the Death Note live action films from 2006, which were outstanding. I'm definitely going to do a review of those in the future. He directed the Gamera trilogy of the 1990s, which is also very impressive. Now, if you've seen some of those older Gamera films, which are, I think they're cheesy fun, but the newer Gamera trilogy from the 90s was actually very good. And he also directed what I think is the best Godzilla film of all time, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack from 2001. So you have a very good director here at the helm of My Soul is Slashed, and it's an entertaining film. So this one to check out. Now availability here, let's take a look. Difficult to find, unfortunately, but definitely put it on your list if you can check it out. This is a cool movie. The next film is a sequel. Another sequel here in our video. It is Evil Dead Trap 2, 1991 Japanese horror. Now you must understand that this is only a sequel in name. This is actually very different from its predecessor. There's practically no connection at all, actually. And unlike the original film, there are no Evil Dead traps here, unfortunately. But it does focus on an introverted, overweight woman who works as a cinema projectionist at night, and also focuses on her acquaintance, who is a news reporter covering a series of brutal murders targeted against women. So this is, one positive here is that this is a very grimy, ugly film with some serious mean streaks to it. You really feel like dirty when watching it. And I really think that's a positive. On the other hand, there are also a few eye-catching visuals, such as huge neon lights. There's also some good scoring here, and some creepy atmosphere. The first few death scenes are rather tame and limited to corpse shots, but the gore certainly picks up quite a bit and contributes some nasty scenes later on. There are also some psychological elements beneath the surface to enjoy. So this is really kind of an odd film. It feels different from kind of the typical horror film. I can't really explain why. I think it's mostly the style, the grime, maybe the focus on a very, I guess, unorthodox lead character, too. It definitely feels like an off-the-beaten-track film, but it's definitely worth checking out. Now, if I had to rank it with the first film, I do think that I enjoy the first Evil Dead Trap just a little bit more because the score is just unbelievable and it's more outlandish. But Evil Dead Trap 2 is, I would say it's more dramatically grounded and even a little bit more disturbing, if that makes sense. Now, availability of Evil Dead Trap 2, it is widely available on DVD. So feel free to check that one out. Next is a film called Turtle Vision, 1991 Japanese exploitation horror drama. So in this film, a cameraman becomes obsessed with a schoolgirl prostitute and the violent actions against her clients. Now this is a film by our good friend Hiruko Sato. And as I mentioned in a prior video, his films frequently have a creepy, voyeuristic, dark psychological vibe to them, and his visuals also often used video camera footage and static screens. This is also true here. So the cameraman here is a very shady guy whose job is to videotape young prostitutes, and from what I remember, he sells the tapes to someone who then distributes them on the black market. So one night this guy sees this particular girl murder her client and he becomes infatuated with her. Interesting premise. I would have to say that the story and the characters are a bit on the thin side though. But regardless, the runtime of 59 minutes moves along pretty well. And the style, atmosphere, and general premise is enough to hold your interest. I do think so. So, viewer be warned though that there is quite a bit of sex in this, as well as some rape. So our good friend Sato gave us one that's pretty good here. Kind of an interesting film if you're into kind of low budget exploitation with some artistic flair to it. So Turtle Vision, I did a Google search on this and it's actually available on a porn site for viewing called X Videos, and it has English subtitles on that site. So feel free to check that one out. Actually, I did a few searches on X Videos for some, Japanese horror movies, and there's some other Hiruko Sato films that are on there, including Pleasure Kill, which I covered in a previous video, also known as Lust Mord. That one is also on there. Kind of crazy, but hey, a few of these Asian horror films can be found on porn sites. Now, let's move on, shall we? Our last film tonight is another interesting one. It is called Last Frankenstein, 1991 Japanese horror comedy. So this film tells the story of a scientist who attempts to create the new Adam and Eve, which he defines as humans who cannot be tainted by their emotions. Now his experiment involves the reanimation of two corpses, but problems arise when his subjects refuse to procreate. Definitely a bit of an oddball film here with some weird characters and humor to establish a light mood. It's kind of it's one of those films that you watch it and it's hard to describe why it's so different, but it definitely has a little bit of a different feel to it. The pacing moves a bit slowly, but it does focus quite a lot on how the reanimated corpses live normal lives in a state of kind of confusion, kind of a fish out of water scenario. So in that sense, it actually has a number of similarities to a film we recently covered here called My Soul is Slashed, because it takes kind of a monster theme and infuses it with the everyday problems that a normal person would have. So it definitely has a kind of an interesting slant to it. It's a good film that's worth seeking out, I would say. So Last Frankenstein, unfortunately, is difficult to find. Same with My Soul is Slashed. Those are two, again, if I had $1 billion and I could just release any Japanese movies I would want, this would be kind of a double feature for my DVD releases, because they go well together, and they're a bit different. They have some dramatic flair. If you look at some of the reviews online, like on IMDb, some people really like these movies a lot, but, we'll See if you could track it down sometime. I think they're worth a watch. So that's it for 1990 and 1991. Some interesting stuff here to seek out. And you may have noticed that all of those ultra nutty Hong Kong sorcery flicks from the 80s have dissipated quite a bit during the early 90s. However, we did cover some oddball films in this video, but they're a different type of oddball. They're predominantly from Japan, and they have a grounded, dramatic feel to them. So kind of an interesting turn of events in the industry. So be sure to join me in my next video where we will explore Asian horror films from 1992 and 1993. And as always, we'll see you next time.